Can that light bulb be alive after all these years? There's no way. Okay, this may be the coolest thing that I ever get to show you on this channel without having an armed guard nearby. The priceless relic that is inside this box vanished about a quarter of a century ago. It was thought to be lost forever. But now, through a lot of research, some tremendous luck, and some seriously amazing people, it has resurfaced. Now, this video is about Steve Kufeld and the Telrad reflex finder. Steve was the one-man band who invented the Telrad back in the 1970s. That makes the Telrad the grandfather of all telescope reflex finders, such as the red dot finder and the Rigel Systems finder, and a lot of copycat versions that came and went over the years. Now, if you've never used a Telrad, they're pretty cool. They project 3 red concentric circles far out in front of your telescope, allowing you to aim your telescope at any astronomical target in the night sky. The smallest circle is about a half a degree wide, which means that a full moon just fits within the boundary of that little circle. The other circles represent 2 degrees and 4 degrees. Now that comes into play when you are using the Telrad for star hopping. And even to this day, they sell a ton of these Telrad finders. I even have an affiliate link down in the description box of this video. But before the Telrad became a must-have item for any large telescope, there was the handmade prototype that Steve Kufeld built in his garage on Betty Street in a suburb of Los Angeles. And after being missing for a couple of decades, the prototype is hopefully inside this box that arrived just a little bit ago. So let's grab some museum gloves and open this box up. For perspective, this grainy image is the last known photo of the prototype, likely taken in either the 1980s or mid-1990s. We'll get into the wild path that this took to the astronomy garage later, but for now, let's see what it looks like today in 2026. Here we go, we're about to look at it. It hasn't been seen by more than 2 people in the last quarter century. There it is. Look at that. Wow, look at that. Oh my goodness. Look at that. So here's a Telrad. Just for a comparison. The similarity between the early version and the modern version demonstrates just how strong the original design really was. Now right away, you notice some similarities. They have the tilted glass, right? On the modern one, the on-off switch and the dimmer are in one switch. And you have the 3 calibration screws. And on the prototype, there's an on-off switch. And here's a lamp adjustment, so that's probably the potentiometer right there. Oh, now this is fascinating. So the way that you aim a modern Telrad is with these 3 white calibration screws. And in the prototype, it looks like he has just 3 screws that you tighten to kind of aim the cylinder. And my understanding is that a D-cell battery goes in here. Now, if you've ever wondered why the Telrad is so long, that is because early on until around 1981 or 1982, these were powered by a single D-cell battery. They've since switched over to AA batteries, but you can tell right here, it looks like there's a D-cell battery that goes in there. We'll open that up. But as you can see, it looks like a lot of the design was there already, just it was in different places. Right here, there's some residue where there were some labels, and I have a marketing image, a photograph of this prototype that shows you that there were a couple of printed labels there. So they probably have been lost to the ages, but that's a small loss for having access to this. Very cool. Right now, I've been given permission to disassemble this and unlock the secrets of the prototype Telrad, but if I run into any resistance on the fasteners, I will stop. I don't want to break this or ruin it in any way. We will be revisiting this prototype throughout the video, including putting a new battery in to see if it actually turns back on. So you can tell that this was a proof of concept prototype because there's really no way to attach it to the telescope. In modern day Telrads, they have these cleats on the bottom that go into a mount bracket. This doesn't have anything like that. This is interesting because this part is made out of some kind of, I think, plastic, and this is made out of some kind of metal. It looks like it was custom cast. And to understand how the Telrad came into being, you really have to understand Steve Kufeld. Steve Kufeld was born in Kansas back in 1939. Now, eventually, in 1963, he earned a degree in mechanical engineering from Kansas State University. After that, he looked to California, which was the epicenter for the aerospace industry at the time. And in 1964, he found a job at Douglas Aircraft in Long Beach. That's a suburb of Los Angeles. Now, it's hard to imagine in this day and age, but back then on his single income, he was able to buy a small house on Betty Street in the suburb of Huntington Beach. Now, this would soon become an important element in the history of the Telrad. His life began to accelerate just a few years later in 1968. In January of that year, he joined the Los Angeles Astronomical Society, which has their monthly meetings in the famous Griffith Observatory. Fun fact, the Griffith Observatory was MacGyver's house in the pilot episode of the MacGyver series. That's right, the entire observatory was his house. Here's a photo of several members of the Los Angeles Astronomical Society building their dark observation site, which is located in the mountains north of Los Angeles. This picture was taken in 1971. There's Steve right there. Now, eventually, this dark site would be renamed in Steve's honor, but I don't want to get too far ahead of the story just yet. So back to Steve and his Telrad. It was at the Los Angeles Astronomical Society meetings where he met his good friend Lou Chilton, who thankfully provided some of the details that I'm going to be talking about here pretty soon. Now, as the 1970s rolled on, Steve got a new job at Optical Instruments Corporation in the suburb of Buena Park. Interestingly enough, one of their customers was Celestron at the time. On a sunny afternoon in 1977, Steve and his friend Lou wandered into an electronics and optical surplus store in Pasadena, California called CNH Sales. Now, that store was a gathering ground for engineers and optical experts. They would go there hoping to find some really cool pieces of used equipment. As they wandered the aisles that day, Steve found something called an aircraft reflex targeting sight. Now, having worked at McDonnell Douglas, he was probably already familiar with the concept. Now, aircraft reflex targeting sight is a lot of fancy words, but the reflex part is the key. Any reflex finder scope uses a red bullseye, or sometimes called the reticle, and the diverging light rays of that reticle image are projected onto a diagonal mirror, which bounces it up through what's called the collimating lens. Now, the purpose of that lens is to take the diverging light rays and make them parallel. After that, some of the light rays bounce off the glass and towards the observer's eye. And since the light rays are parallel to the observer, those red circles appear to be infinitely far away. So even if you move your head side to side, the bullseye typically stays right on target. To show you what I mean, here's what one of the old Mark III military finder scopes look like in action. You can see how no matter how the viewer moves his head, the target stays on that airplane. Now, in real life, the effect is somewhat bizarre the first time you see it, but this technology has been showing up in heads-up displays, or HUDs, on aircraft for many years now, and recently even in automobiles. Here's what the HUD looks like in the new Corvette. No, I do not own a Corvette, but a friend of mine does. Fun fact, Corvettes are both amazing and terrifying. As I mentioned, Steve was already an amateur astronomer and a very active member of the Los Angeles Astronomical Society, so this feature of the faraway floating target really intrigued him almost immediately. What a great way to aim your telescope, right? Now, the story goes that after that fateful find at the surplus store in 1977, Steve spent a few months building a prototype that was especially suited for the amateur astronomer. If you're enjoying this video, please push that like and subscribe button. And if you happen to have a Telrad, go ahead and leave a message down below to share what you like about them. Before I dig into the prototype, we need to take a quick look at a modern Telrad. They haven't changed much in about a half a century. but this is what they look like. This is the on-off switch and the dimmer. And here are the 3 collimation screws to help aim this. That rattling around here is the batteries. So again, when this started out, it had a D-size battery, but now they have the AA's. So the 3 volts goes into here and powers the LED. It's very straightforward. The circuitry is actually really simple. The 3 volts from the 2 batteries powers an LED, which shines through this piece of glass here that has the bullseye on it. Let's see if we can see that real quick. Can you see the bullseye? It's sort of there, right? But let's try an experiment. Let's open this up. It's just 4 screws here. Here we go, there's the diagonal mirror. And let's shine a light down in there. You can see on the right side is where the switch goes through, right? And that's just a rotary potentiometer with an on-off switch. So if yours ever breaks, you can look up that part. There is a resistor on there. That's probably just to limit current that goes to the LED. You don't want to fry the LED. But you can see the target down there. I'm going to turn the lights out so we can see what this looks like. Okay, so I'm going to turn it on. There you go. You're seeing the LED light coming straight through that little piece of glass that had the target on it. Of course, there's no mirror back here to bounce it up through the lens or the diagonal glass. Let's go ahead and take our diagonal lens, put the back plate back on, see what we can see. Let me turn out these lights, make sure it's really dark. There we go. And there it is. That is, of course, the light shining this direction. It hits the diagonal, bounces up through this lens, and then bounces off this piece of glass here back towards where your eye is looking through this. So, again, it's a fairly straightforward circuit. The design is a classic. It's lasted half a century without hardly changing at all, and it works great. People swear by these. So there you go. And it still says Telrad Reflex Sight by Steve Kufeld. Look at that. His name is still on it. Regarding the history of the Telrad, I have 2 good sources. The first is Steve's good friend Lou Chilton, who I've already discussed earlier. The second is from newspaper journalist Barry Kawa, and these stories complement each other well. Barry's story comes from an in-person interview that he did with Steve on June 19th, 1997. Now, that day was very important because it was the last time Steve was ever interviewed, and it was also likely the last time that he was ever photographed. And that's because Steve passed away just 11 days after Barry visited him at his house in the mountains north of Los Angeles. Steve was only 57 at the time. He was taken away too soon. Now, here is that final photograph of Steve, rest in peace. Regarding this video, Barry's interview is just one of 2 miracles explaining how the Telrad prototype is in my hands right now. During the interview, Steve showed him the Telrad prototype, and Barry mentioned that it might be collectible someday. Steve found that very amusing, and he said to Barry, "If you want to collect that one, you can have it." And I don't know of any fan of astronomy who could pass up an opportunity like that. And for the next 4 years, this prototype traveled with Barry as his journalism career took him all around the country. But then in 2001, fate intervened. He got a dream job offer overseas, and he had to sell all of his astronomy equipment. Now, at the time, he lived right here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and back then, one of the best ways to sell your telescope equipment is to use a classified ad magazine that was called Starry Messenger. Now, if you remember reading this back in the day, please leave a comment down in the comment section. One of the people advertising there was an astronomer named Ed Villareal. After negotiating a deal, Ed purchased all of Barry's astronomy equipment, including the Telrad prototype. That year was 2001. Now, when Barry told me about this, I thought, well, the prototype is gone forever. This would be part of the movie where all hope was lost. But on the off chance that Mr. Villareal was still active in the hobby, I started asking around cloudy nights, and I found out that he was. So I sent him an unsolicited message and discovered that the prototype Telrad had been sitting on his bookshelf for the last 25 years. Now, even more amazing was that its history had not really either been conveyed or just lost to the years during that huge equipment sale. So Ed kept it around on his bookshelf because it was simply just a really fascinating thing to look at. So I've had the luxury of speaking with Ed a couple of times in the past year, and I have to say he's one of the most fascinating telescope people that I've ever met. He's seen everything and he's met everybody, even taking a mirror making class from John Dobson. In addition to being a great aiming device, the Telrad has another helpful use. It's called star hopping. This usually requires a secondary tool, such as these published Finder books. This one is by Brent Watson. This is actually a set, and it's for the Messier objects. There's volume 1 and volume 2. Well, we can open it up to my favorite, which is the M42, the Great Orion Nebula. There's a lot of information here, but the part that is really interesting is the chart that comes with each one. And there you go, there's the Great Orion Nebula. And there's a lot of information there. Again, what's neat is that it shows the Telrad circles right there, and it gives you a relative location of where to put the circles on the constellation of Orion if you want to find the nebula. Star hopping charts exist like this for all kinds of cool stuff in the night sky. So again, that's star hopping. Now, of course, you can't sell a product like this without a name. So before it launched in 1978, Steve came up with the acronym Telrad, which stood for Telescope Reflex Aiming Device. Steve made them all by hand at his house on Betty Street, making the parts by pouring urethane into rubber molds. He also painted them a metallic bronze, sort of like this color right here. So if you happen to have a Telrad from back in that time that is not black, well, you've got a rare piece of history on your hands. By 1980, he couldn't keep up with demand, so he spent somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 to have injection molds made. Fun fact, to this day, the main parts of the Telrad body are still made that way here in the USA. I'll talk more about that later. That same year, Steve and Lou went to Africa to view total solar eclipse. Now, on the way back, they had gone through England, where Steve bought a 6-inch refractor. As a side note, that telescope was recently bought by astronomer Jordan Ragsdale. He's known for making custom mods and add-ons for the famous Astroscan telescopes that he distributes through eBay. Jordan kindly sent me these pictures of Steve's refractor telescope. It's a real doozy. Now, eventually, Steve was making way more money on the Telrads than he did from his job. So he quit his job and he started making Telrads full-time. His sales expanded even further when the theatrical industry discovered how useful Telrads were. They would mount them on their spotlights so that they could point them at the actors and then turn the spotlight on, and it was instantly on the actors. Who knew, right? In the early 1980s, Steve started advertising his Telrads in astronomy magazines. In one of the earliest, you can see that it mentions that it's powered by a D-cell battery, which is partially why the telescope is such a long finder scope. He quickly switched to using AA batteries though, and by the way, I did my own testing on this, and with 2 fresh batteries, I was able to get this to run continuously 24 hours a day for almost a week. Humorously, Steve built a 4-foot-long Telrad to take to trade shows with him, and from what I've been told, it actually functioned. Although I don't know what size battery that one used. In the 1990s, after a decade of success, Steve moved the whole operation from his Betty Street house down in the Los Angeles area to a rural area called Pine Mountain Club, and it was in the mountains just west of the Mojave Desert. As a true engineer, he couldn't stop fixing things, and at one point he built a small railway tram that would move equipment and groceries from his garage, which was at the bottom of the property, up to the main house part that was up near the top of the hill. Here's a picture of Steve and I believe his parents standing next to the tram. Now, eventually Steve just couldn't do it all by himself, and he hired a local resident named Rhonda Cummings to help him assemble the Telrads. And by 1997, it's estimated that he had built over 50,000 Telrads. Now, as I mentioned earlier, journalist Barry Kawa interviewed him on June 19th of that year, and Steve passed away just 11 days later on June 30th. Steve wasn't married at the time, and he didn't have kids, so ownership of the company reverted to his parents and his brother, but they decided to eventually transfer that ownership to Rhonda Cummings and her husband Wes. Now, as the only employee that Steve had ever really had, it made perfect business sense. She knew how to build them and sell them and market them. And interestingly enough, the Cummings family still makes them by hand here in the United States. So here it is. Here is the prototype. Now, one question that a lot of people have is, how are we going to mount this on a telescope? Well, I've thrown this thing together, and we'll see if this works. This will fit in there, but this is just a dovetail, and this will fit into a dovetail holder on my 8-inch Dobsonian. So I think this will work pretty well. So let me just snap my fingers, and here it is. It'll go on just like this. And these 3 screws are how you aim this device. Kind of odd. Technically, I could use these as well, but it's these 3 screws that are meant to be able to aim this. By adjusting these, the whole thing tilts up and down, left and right. Let's take these off right now. I guess first things first, once again, this has a variable resistor right there. I guess it's a potentiometer right there. It has the on-off switch, and it has this tube right here. Now, this, I believe, is where the battery goes. When these were new, they had a single D cell. I've got the D cell. So let's open this guy up. I don't want to yank anything. There's foam. Come on. So there's a little foam plug. There's a wire. There's a washer soldered to the wire. Can you see down in there? Let me get a light. What's down in there? Look at that. That looks like the base of a light bulb. Is it soldered? Yeah, I don't think it's not an LED. It looks like a light bulb. Were LEDs really expensive back in 1977? Let me know down in the comments. I guess when he was developing the prototype, he used the light bulb. 1.5 volt, because it only uses the single D cell. Let's put a D cell in there. Let's see. Watch out for the June bugs in here. It's that time of year. June bugs flying everywhere. All right, now I'm just going to hold this here. Let me turn the lights out. Nothing. I guess after half a century, that ball's probably dead. We'll do a little bit more searching. All right, let's take that battery out. Being very careful. Let's take this off. All right. Look at this. Half a century. So there's an O-ring. Don't want to mess with that. That's probably pretty brittle. I guess that cylinder would fit right around there. And now I saw this when I looked in the end. There's an access hatch, and it's held on with tape. It's unfortunately, this tape is all torn right here. I will probably, at a minimum, I will cut this tape and see if I can pull this off and see if we can see how this is working. There are 3 screws here. Earlier on I said that this was made out of metal. It is not. It's some kind of, I think it's some kind of plastic. So let's take these 3 screws out. All right, here it goes. What do we got here? All right, that's one at a time. We have a diagonal mirror there that shines up through the little round lens. All right, it's a piece of glass. Mirror looks to be in pretty good shape. I did take a Q-tip and clean off this diagonal glass right here a little bit earlier. Okay. Yeah, this is some kind of plastic. In all the stories that I've read, he had rubber molds that he would pour the urethane in, and it would take on the shape. Okay. Let's see what we got here. All right, so you obviously can't see. So there's the variable resistor there, or potentiometer. I forget the word. And then there's the on-off switch. And it looks like these were all panels that were glued together. And you can sort of see up in there. Let me get a mirror. I want to see if we can see the reticle. Look at that. There's masking tape holding the reticle plate in. I'll see if I can get a better picture of that so you can see the reticle. Wow. Now I'm going to do something here. Let me try this again. I'm going to touch this to the battery. And I'm going to see, maybe it was just really dim. So when we turn that on, do you see a reticle? Oh my gosh, I do. You see that? Oh my gosh. Can that light bulb be alive after all these years? There's no way. There's absolutely no way. Okay, wait a second. Oh my gosh, it's working. Look at that. Can you see it? After half a century, it's still working. Oh my gosh. Okay, this is getting exciting. Okay, I tell you what I'm going to do. I am going to put the cover back on the front here. I want to be very careful here. It's good. I can't believe this still works. I got to be super careful because that filament in this bulb is at half a century old. So, okay, so I'm going to put this in and put the screws in. All right. Let's turn it on. Oh my goodness, look at that. It said something under it. It says 4-degree radius. Yeah, I think it says 4-degree radius on the very bottom. I'll have to take a picture of it. It seems too bright. Let's see if the variable resistor works. Okay, it's actually quite sharp. My camera's just not capturing it. Okay, so let's see if we can get it on a telescope and give it a test. All right, before we go out and test this, I do have to give out a huge thanks to Chilton, Barry Kawa, Jordan Ragsdale, the Cummings family, and of course Ed Villareal. They have helped keep Steve's legacy alive and well, and they've also kept this in really good condition. About 6 hours ago, the Artemis II rockets were fired and put the ship onto its translunar injection. That's, of course, taking it to the moon. So it's pretty cool to think that we've almost got a full moon. It might actually be a full moon. And we're going to be using Steve Kufeld's prototype Telrad for the first time in maybe half a century. I'm pretty excited. First, I'll turn it on. And there it is. Now, I haven't sighted it in. It's off just a little bit. Not bad. Let's see. Okay. Now. There it is. Okay, so just real quick, it's almost 2 o'clock in the morning. This is really exciting. I did not expect for this to work. I thought it was broken, but the real miracle here is that the little light bulb that was in there is still good after 50 years. You have to give credit to Steve for picking high quality products. Every part of this is still working. It's very, very exciting to have been able to use this. It's really tough to convey what a privilege it was to look through this tonight at the full moon, knowing that the last person to use this was probably Steve Kufeld himself, and to think that he built a small empire from this clever design. Steve was one of those rare people who could build anything, and he chose to invent something that helped so many of us in the astronomy hobby.
he is proof that if you have a good idea and you carry it out well, great things can happen. So the next time you're looking up through your Telrad at the night sky and you see those 3 concentric red rings, take a moment to thank Steve. Thank you for watching. Clear skies, everybody. And if you want to hear the amazing story about how a blind man helped invent the Burd-Jones telescope, click on this video right here. Take care.